So I'm very pleased then to turn the floor to Dr. Attiya Waris, who's here from Kenya. Dr. Waris is the senior lecturer in the Department of Commercial Law at the University of Nairobi in Kenya. And she's a visiting lecturer at the National University of Rwanda. She's a member of the OECD Informal Task Force on Tax and Development, and a member of the board of the Tax Justice Network, as well as Lawyers for Better Business. You certainly have a lot of friends in the room. Yes. So please help me welcome Dr. Waris.
Can you hear me? Yes? All right. How tired are you? You still want to hear more about tax? You are to be congratulated. My instructions were to talk about where we are and where we come from in tax, and then to give a few ideas of where I think we can go in the future. But because you're a little sleepy, can I tell you a story? So it's not a very happy story, so don't expect to smile. It's about a Canadian company called Tyomin. I don't know if it's familiar.
Can you say it again?
Tyomin. I'm sorry, my accent must be Tyomin. Is that better?
Yeah.
Thank you. You are our mic lady. Can you hear me? Okay. So, Kenya discovered about 20 years ago that they had 10% of the world's deposits of titanium. And titanium is in your mobile phone. So if you own a phone, you own some titanium. It's also one of the lightest metals. So they use it to build rocket ships, they use it to build planes. It's a very versatile metal. So when they discovered the deposit, this was one of the two largest deposits in the world. So obviously Kenya was very excited. We hadn't discovered oil yet, so finally we hit the mineral game. And what was unfortunate and fortunate was that the particular deposit was found in land that had cultural attachment to a particular community. They lived there for hundreds of years. And so obviously they weren't willing to move. After 20 years of negotiations and environmental protection and investigations, the result of all the research done by the government was that they were going to authorize the extraction of the titanium, but that Tyomin in return was going to build a new port at the coast. They were going to build a road network, a rail network, getting the mineral to the coast. They were also going to hire people, and they were going to process the metal in Kenya and not export it out of the country. And I'm sure that you may have heard many stories about this, but this was to wake you up a little bit. But what is important about it is that after it ended, the final negotiations resulted in a 3% corporation tax. We have made a connection to tax, complete degradation of the environment. Unfortunately, the titanium is found with uranium in that particular deposit. In order to remove it, they used a form of chemical sulfuric acid, which has turned the land radioactive for a minimum of 50 to 100 years plus. So the people that have the cultural attachment to the land, so cultural rights, do come in as well, will not be able to go back to that land in their lifetime. The animals that are born there have 2 heads and all the normal radioactivity results of there. So you have the right to a clean and healthy environment. And I know that there are huge gaping quarries in Canada where mining took place and there was no rehabilitation. So the right to an environment has linkages across the world. That's sort of how I started doing my research in taxation. But I will leave that, the rest of the story for another time. They didn't build the factory, they didn't build the board. The normal story, they hire about 200 workers who shovel soil onto the backs of lorries that are driven on the existing road network to the existing port, where it is then exported to a factory somewhere else in the world where they now process the titanium. That was the end result of 20 years of negotiation. So obviously the Kenyan government tried very hard, but somewhere along the way something went wrong. So where have we come from and where are we going to? And now I will take you through a small walk through history. In order to build that link between tax and human rights, the first place you have to look at is security. The ability to keep your people safe. That has always been the primary responsibility of the state. And if you look at developing countries in Africa, that is still a challenge. Somalia, Sudan. Now in Asia, you've got Afghanistan, Iraq. I mean, these are countries in constant turmoil. And the result of that is the right to security is still a problem. There's the first right that is still critical to the existence of a state that isn't taking place yet. So then what happens after you get your security sorted out? You have your defense, your outer borders, and then you have your security within your state as well. And once you have that, where do you go to next? And here's a challenge for people working in human rights. The one thing that tax practitioners and economists don't prioritize is what comes next. So there's always this battle. Is it health or education? Is it the judiciary? Is it parliament? And then you have the additional problem of civil and political rights are immediately realizable. You know that language in human rights. But economic, social, and cultural rights are progressively realizable. So does that mean the judiciary and the right to fair trial is therefore more important than the right to education? And this is a constant battle taking place in countries all over the world throughout history. And each of the decisions that they've made throughout history, whether you're looking at the more capitalistic states that went from the civil and political rights to the ex-communist Marxist states that went to the economic, social, and cultural rights, whichever group you look at, the prioritization is a constant challenge. And now when you look inside a particular country, that is also constantly in turmoil. And when you look at the international level, now we have this incredible mix of countries, all in these completely different prioritization areas, who are now trying to come together and agree on it. So the good news is that all the tax researchers have actually been able to show that there are huge amounts of money that are basically floating around untaxed. And now here's the point where human rights have to stand up and say, we want this money and this is what we want. Right now, I see a disconnect. If you come into the one there's a disconnect between who is opening up the money and showing where it is, and then how it gets used. And how it's getting used is different in very diverse ways, and sometimes in not very useful ways. So we already talked about the bailouts. So that's taxpayer money being used in a particular way. Then you have the Luxembourg CD. Is everybody aware of it? The banker that sold a CD on the Luxembourg bank accounts to Germany. Well, in 2009, if they had collected the tax, the Germans would have not been in a fiscal crisis because the amount of back taxes that were due based on the CD alone for Germany was 300 million euros. And that would have basically plugged the entire deficit for them. Instead, they completely waived it. So here's a political decision, and where's the voices asking for, I don't know, kindergarten care because you only have it in Quebec and not in the rest of the provinces as I found today. I mean, these are questions you have to ask yourself that are very, very important. So, I'm from Kenya, so Africa, what's happening in Africa? And I already mentioned that security is a problem, but now we have a good attempt. There is something called the Tana Forum on security issues, and this year's theme of the Tana Forum was on illicit capital flight. So there is activity in Africa. 2 years ago, the African Commission on Human Rights actually passed a resolution, I think it's number 256 of 2012, that stated specifically that illicit capital flight has a direct impact on human rights and that there is a need to do research on it. So there are other reports at international level, but there's also a lot of academic literature, not only within the continent, but there's also activity at regional level in Africa already beginning to awaken to the idea that the capital flight and the capital flows are having a direct impact on the achievement of human rights. And there's a lot of research on that which I'll be happy to share with you later. So if I were to talk about the way forward, since I actually come to mind here, one of the things that I think is the biggest problem is that the human rights people are going to be really happy to grab onto the tax, and the tax people are not going to be willing to hand over money to the human rights people. There is a language disconnect between those that are working in human rights that are looking for the resources and those that are working in taxation that are looking to adopt budget lines and allocate money. So if you look at it from the point of view of the tax person will talk about about housing and the judiciary and the parliament, but they will not talk about the right to fair trial and therefore how the judiciary is achieving it. That's what human rights mean. So there is budgetary analysis taking place, but it's still not yet enough. So there's a need to begin to really steer all of that ahead. Of course, gender budgeting is already in place, children's budgeting, now health budgeting is taking place as well, but it's not as widespread as it should be. And one of the fallacies of human rights is that civil and political rights were immediately realizable because there is nowhere in the world where they have been realized. And there is a need to question that whole rights require resources argument and to have that input into it. So in 3 or 4 points, if I were to say in the next 5 or 10 years, what would I like to see happening within tax and human rights, is of course finding that link and making it concrete. And the best way you could do that is by getting some sort of international convention that will state that rights require resources. It's 3 words, but it doesn't exist anywhere in human rights speak. The closest we have is the Declaration on the Right to Development, which of course is very important. The other thing is there's no indicators, which is a problem, and data has been pointed out already by several of the speakers. The other thing that's really important is that there is a UN tax committee, and there is a need to get that tax committee to actually take charge of the financing part of human rights and to begin to push that forward. But if I were to finish with one last sentence, I would say that rights-based advocates need to begin to really conceptualize not only how much they need, but ideally what they think, because money is now there and nobody's asking for it. And if you don't make the demands very clear and concrete and as idealistic as you want it to, because it's a lot of money that's out there, then you will not be in place at the point in time when they're giving up. There will be just another tax amnesty or bailout or more tax exemptions that are granted because the lobby on the part of businesses is very strong. Thank you very much.
Dr. Waris, for reminding us that there's a language, there's a rhetoric, and that we have to really work through that. I think that we saw some of that today, and just being able to talk to each other is so important to understand what the words mean to each other and do a lot of defining. So thank you for those insightful